Do you remember what your grandmother cooked at 4 a.m. before anyone woke? 30 hillbilly breakfasts from Appalachian kitchens in the 1970s, water pancakes, stale bread with gravy. They fueled 12-hour factory shifts on lard and flour, kept families standing when payday was 4 days out.
Do you remember what I used to cook before the sun came up? We had lard instead of butter, flour instead of feast.
She fed 6 people for a quarter, never let anyone see her cry, and you've never told your children she did it. Here's number 1. Sawmill gravy over bread, when there was no meat for the gravy. This was white gravy made from flour, lard, and water poured over torn pieces of white bread. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Sawmill gravy got its name from lumber camps where workers needed cheap filling food, brown flour in lard until it smelled nutty. Add water slowly while stirring. The mixture would thicken into pale gravy. Pour it over bread, torn into a bowl. The bread would soak up the gravy and become soft. This was pure starch and fat, fuel for bodies that needed calories for physical labor. Sawmill gravy disappeared when people could afford milk and sausage for proper gravy. You can make it for about 35 cents today. Fried mush, leftover cornmeal mush, transformed into breakfast. This was yesterday's cornmeal mush, sliced and fried until crispy. In 1970, this cost about 3 cents per serving. That's roughly 25 cents today. Make cornmeal mush the night before. Boil cornmeal with water and salt until thick. Pour into a pan and refrigerate overnight. The mush would solidify into a sliceable block. Cut it into rectangles. Fry in lard until golden and crispy on both sides. Serve with molasses or sugar if you had it. Most ate it plain with salt. The crispy exterior and soft interior made it more interesting than regular mush. Fried mush disappeared when instant oatmeal became cheaper and faster. You can make it for about 30 cents today. Potato pancakes, when you had potatoes but no flour. These were grated potatoes mixed with a tiny bit of flour and fried. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per serving. That's roughly 50 cents today. Grate raw potatoes on a box grater. Squeeze out excess water. Mix with just enough flour to bind, maybe 2 tablespoons per potato. Add salt, form into flat patties. Fry in lard until golden and crispy on both sides. The outside would be crunchy, the inside soft and starchy. Serve with salt or molasses. These were filling and used potatoes instead of expensive flour. Potato pancakes never fully disappeared. They became latkes in Jewish cooking. You can make them for about 55 cents today. Grits with lard, Southern breakfast at its cheapest. This was hominy grits, cooked in water and topped with a spoonful of lard. In 1970, this cost about 2 cents per serving. That's roughly 20 cents today. Grits were cheaper than oatmeal. A bag cost 30 cents and lasted for weeks. Boil water with salt. Pour in grits slowly while stirring. Cook until thick and creamy. Spoon into bowls. Drop a spoonful of lard on top. The lard would melt into the hot grits, creating richness. Stir it in. The grits would become glossy and fatty. This was pure carbohydrates and fat energy food. Grits with lard disappeared when people could afford butter. You can make them for about 25 cents today. Biscuits and sorghum, when honey was too expensive. These were homemade biscuits with sorghum syrup drizzled on top. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per serving. That's roughly 50 cents today. Sorghum syrup was cheaper than honey or maple syrup. A jar cost 40 cents. Make biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk. Bake until golden. Split them open while hot. Drizzle sorghum inside. The syrup was thick, dark, and tasted like molasses, but milder. The biscuits were buttery and flaky. Together they made a sweet breakfast that felt special. Biscuits and sorghum disappeared when pancake syrup became the standard sweetener. You can make them for about 55 cents today. 5 breakfasts down, 25 to go. And you're already seeing it. Every single one was fuel, not food. Every single one cost under 10 cents in 1970. Every single one disappeared when families could afford eggs and bacon. But here's where it gets harder. The next 5 breakfasts are even more desperate. These are what you ate when the flour was running low and payday was still 3 days away. When breakfast wasn't about satisfaction, it was about surviving until lunch. Let's keep going. Cornbread crumbled in milk when cereal was too expensive. This was leftover cornbread crumbled into a bowl with milk poured over it. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per serving. That's roughly 40 cents today. Cornbread from dinner became breakfast. Crumble it into rough chunks. Pour milk over it, fresh if you had it, canned if you didn't. The cornbread would absorb the milk and become soft. Add sugar if you had it. This was eaten with a spoon like cereal. The cornbread would fall apart into mush. It tasted like corn and milk, bland but filling. Cornbread and milk disappeared when boxed cereal became affordable. You can make it for about 45 cents today. Fried bread, when toast required too much electricity. This was white bread fried in lard until golden. In 1970, this cost about 3 cents per serving. That's roughly 25 cents today. Heat lard in a skillet. Place bread slices in the hot fat. They'd sizzle and brown quickly. Flip them once. The bread would become crispy and golden on both sides, soft in the middle. The lard soaked into the bread and made it rich. Sprinkle with sugar or salt depending on what you had. Fried bread was faster than making biscuits and used less fuel than running the oven. It disappeared when toasters became standard. You can make it for about 30 cents today. Oatmeal with lard when butter was impossible. This was plain oatmeal cooked in water with a spoonful of lard stirred in. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Oatmeal was cheap. A container cost 50 cents and lasted for weeks. Boil water with salt. Add oats. Cook until thick. Stir in lard. The lard would melt and make the oatmeal creamy and rich. Add sugar or molasses if you had it. Most ate it with just salt. The lard provided fat and calories the oatmeal lacked. Oatmeal with lard disappeared when people could afford milk and butter. You can make it for about 35 cents today. Biscuits and gravy with water gravy when milk was too expensive. These were biscuits topped with gravy made from flour, lard, and water. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per serving. That's roughly 55 cents today. Make biscuits from flour, lard, and water. No buttermilk, no milk. Make gravy the same way. Brown flour in lard, add water. The gravy would be pale and thin compared to milk gravy. Pour it over split biscuits. The gravy would soak in. This was all starch and fat. No protein, no dairy. It filled stomachs and provided energy. Water gravy disappeared when milk became affordable. You can make it for about 60 cents today. Fried potatoes and onions when vegetables meant potatoes. This was sliced potatoes and onions fried in lard until brown. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per serving. That's roughly 65 cents today. Potatoes were cheap. A 5-pound bag cost 30 cents. Onions were cheaper, 15 cents per pound. Slice both thin. Fry in lard until the potatoes were crispy and the onions were soft. Add salt and pepper. You can make them for about 70 cents today. 10 breakfasts down, 20 to go. And here's what you're noticing. None of these had eggs. None had bacon. None had orange juice or coffee with cream. These were carbohydrates and fat, salt, and water. This was survival food that got people out the door and into fields, into factories, into whatever work would pay enough to buy more flour and lard. The next 10 breakfasts show what happened when families had slightly more resources. Not much more, but enough to add one ingredient, one small improvement. Let's keep going. Cornmeal pancakes when wheat flour was too expensive. These were pancakes made from cornmeal, water, and salt. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Cornmeal was cheaper than wheat flour. Mix cornmeal with water and salt until you had thick batter. Fry spoonfuls in lard. The pancakes would be dense and gritty, not fluffy. They'd taste like corn, not like regular pancakes. You can make them for about 35 cents today. Milk toast, when bread and milk were all you had. This was toasted bread in a bowl with hot milk poured over it. Toast bread until golden. Tear it into pieces in a bowl. Heat milk until steaming. Pour it over the toast. Add sugar and cinnamon if you had them. The toast would soften and absorb the milk. This was eaten with a spoon. It tasted like warm, sweet milk with bread. Milk toast disappeared when cereal became cheaper. You can make it for about 55 cents today. Fried eggs on bread, when you could afford eggs, but not bacon. This was fried eggs placed on bread instead of served with toast. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per serving. That's roughly 65 cents today. Eggs were cheap protein, 50 cents per dozen. Fry an egg in lard, place it on bread. The yolk would run into the bread when you bit into it. Add salt and pepper. This was protein and carbohydrates. No meat, no vegetables, but it was more substantial than just bread. Fried eggs on bread never disappeared. They evolved into breakfast sandwiches. You can make them for about 70 cents today. Rice, cooked in milk when oatmeal ran out. This was white rice cooked in milk with sugar. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per serving. That's roughly 55 cents today. Rice was cheap. A bag cost 50 cents and lasted for weeks. Cook rice in milk instead of water. Add sugar and a pinch of salt. The rice would absorb the milk and become creamy. This was like rice pudding, but thinner. Serve hot in bowls. It was sweet and filling. Rice in milk disappeared when instant oatmeal became faster. You can make it for about 60 cents today. Minimal sausage, biscuits with sausage gravy using minimal sausage when you stretched meat as far as possible. These were biscuits with gravy made from one sausage patty stretched to feed 6 people. In 1970, this cost about 12 cents per serving. That's roughly $1 today. Cook one sausage patty, crumble it into tiny pieces. Make gravy with the drippings, flour, and milk. The gravy would have tiny specks of sausage throughout. Pour over biscuits. You could barely taste the meat, but it was there. This was as close to real biscuits and gravy as poor families got. It disappeared when people could afford more sausage. You can make it for about $1.10 today. Cornbread and buttermilk, Southern breakfast that doubled as dessert. This was cornbread crumbled into a glass with buttermilk poured over it. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per serving. That's roughly 50 cents today. Leftover cornbread from dinner became breakfast. Crumble it into a glass. Pour buttermilk over it. The cornbread would soak up the buttermilk and become soft. This was eaten with a spoon. The buttermilk was tangy. The cornbread was slightly sweet. Together, they made something that tasted good despite being poverty food. Cornbread and buttermilk never fully disappeared in the South. You can make it for about 55 cents today. Fried cornmeal mush with molasses when you wanted breakfast to feel special. This was fried cornmeal mush with molasses drizzled on top. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per serving. That's roughly 40 cents today. Slice leftover cornmeal mush. Fry until crispy. Stack the slices on a plate. Drizzle molasses over them. The molasses would soak into the crispy mush. This was sweet and savory together. The crispy texture made it feel more like a real breakfast than just mush. Fried mush with molasses disappeared when pancake syrup became standard. You can make it for about 45 cents today. Bread fried in bacon grease, when the bacon was gone but the grease remained. This was white bread fried in saved bacon grease. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Every family saved bacon grease in a can. When there was no bacon, you used the grease. Heat it in a pan. Fry bread slices until golden. The bread would absorb the bacon flavor. It tasted like bacon without any actual bacon. This was fat and carbohydrates with the ghost of meat. Bacon, grease bread disappeared when people stopped saving grease. You can make it for about 35 cents today. Grits, with butter and sugar when you wanted grits to taste like something. This was grits cooked in water with butter and sugar stirred in. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per serving. That's roughly 40 cents today. Cook grits until thick. Stir in butter if you had it, lard if you didn't. Add sugar. The grits would become sweet and creamy. This was breakfast that felt like a treat. The sugar made it dessert-like. Children actually liked this version of grits. Sweet grits disappeared when people decided grits should only be savory. You can make them for about 45 cents today. Hoe cakes, cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle. These were thin cornmeal cakes made with cornmeal, water, salt, and a tiny bit of sugar. In 1970, this cost about 4 cents per serving. That's roughly 30 cents today. Mix cornmeal with water, salt, and a pinch of sugar. The batter should be thin, thinner than pancake batter. Pour onto a hot greased griddle. The cakes would spread thin and cook quickly. Flip once. They'd be crispy around the edges, soft in the middle. Serve with butter or molasses. The name came from enslaved people cooking them on the blade of a hoe in the fields. Hoe cakes disappeared when people forgot the history. You can make them for about 35 cents today. 20 breakfasts down, 10 to go, and we're entering different territory now, the breakfasts that showed small improvements. These are what you ate when your family had slightly more money, when the pantry had a few more items. These breakfasts had 2 or 3 ingredients instead of 1. They had flavor instead of just calories. They were still poverty food, but they were better poverty food. Let's finish strong. Oatmeal with canned milk, when fresh milk was impossible. This was oatmeal cooked in water with canned evaporated milk stirred in. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per serving. That's roughly 55 cents today. Cook oatmeal in water. Stir in a spoonful of evaporated milk from a can. The milk made the oatmeal creamy without requiring refrigeration. Add sugar if you had it. This was better than oatmeal with just water. The milk added richness and made it feel more substantial. Biscuits with apple butter when jelly was too expensive. These were homemade biscuits with apple butter spread inside. In 1970, this cost about 8 cents per serving. That's roughly 65 cents today. Apple butter was cheaper than jelly, 35 cents per jar versus 40 cents. Make biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk. Split them while hot. Spread apple butter inside. The apple butter was thick, dark, and intensely apple-flavored. This was sweet breakfast that felt special. Fried potatoes with eggs, when you could afford both. This was fried potatoes with eggs scrambled into them. In 1970, this cost about 10 cents per serving. That's roughly 80 cents today. Fry sliced potatoes in lard until crispy. Crack eggs directly into the pan. Scramble them with the potatoes. Add salt and pepper. This was protein and carbohydrates together. It was filling and satisfying. Cornmeal mush with butter and salt when you could afford butter. This was hot cornmeal mush with a pat of butter melting on top. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per serving. That's roughly 50 cents today. Cook cornmeal mush until thick and creamy. Spoon into bowls. Top with butter and salt. The butter would melt into the hot mush and make it rich. This was significantly better than mush with just lard. Butter made it taste almost good. Cornmeal mush with butter disappeared when instant oatmeal became standard. You can make it for about 55 cents today. Pancakes with bacon grease, drizzled on top when syrup was too expensive. These were flour pancakes with bacon grease drizzled over them instead of syrup. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per serving. That's roughly 55 cents today. Make pancakes from flour, water, and baking powder. Stack them on a plate. Drizzle warm bacon grease over them. The grease would soak into the pancakes and add bacon flavor. This was savory breakfast instead of sweet. biscuits, and molasses when sorghum ran out. These were biscuits with molasses drizzled inside. In 1970, this cost about 7 cents per serving. That's roughly 55 cents today. Molasses was cheaper than sorghum and lasted longer. Make biscuits, split them hot, drizzle molasses inside. The molasses was darker and more bitter than sorghum, but still sweet. The biscuits were buttery and flaky. Together they made breakfast that felt like a treat. Grits with cheese when you could afford cheese. This was grits cooked in water with shredded cheese stirred in. In 1970, this cost about 12 cents per serving. That's roughly $1 today. Cook grits until thick. Stir in shredded cheese, usually government cheese or the cheapest store brand. The cheese would melt into the grits and make them creamy and rich. Add salt and pepper. This was the fancy version of grits. Cheese grits never disappeared. They became Southern comfort food. You can make them for about $1.10 today. Fried cornbread. Leftover cornbread transformed. This was leftover cornbread sliced and fried in lard until crispy. In 1970, this cost about 5 cents per serving. That's roughly 40 cents today. Slice cornbread into thick pieces. Fry in lard until golden and crispy on both sides. The outside would become crunchy. The inside stayed soft. Serve with molasses or butter. This was better than plain cornbread. Frying transformed it into something more interesting. Fried cornbread disappeared when people stopped having leftover cornbread. You can make it for about 45 cents today. But fried cornbread represents something fundamental about poverty cooking: the refusal to waste anything and the ability to transform leftovers into something better than the original. Cornbread was a staple in Southern working-class kitchens. It was cheaper than wheat bread, faster to make than yeast bread, and used cornmeal that was readily available and inexpensive. A pan of cornbread cost maybe 20 cents to make. Cornmeal, a little flour, baking powder, salt, an egg if you had one, buttermilk or water. That pan would feed a family for dinner. The leftovers would feed them again for breakfast. Fresh cornbread was good, crumbly, slightly sweet, with a distinctive corn flavor, but day-old cornbread was dry and crumbly, difficult to eat without liquid to wash it down. It would stick in your throat and absorb all the moisture in your mouth. Children complained about eating day-old cornbread. Adults tolerated it, but didn't enjoy it. The cornbread needed transformation. Frying was the answer. It turned stale, dry cornbread into something with texture, richness, and appeal. The process started the night before, or even 2 nights before. After dinner, whatever cornbread remained would be wrapped in a cloth or left in the pan, covered. By morning, it would be firm and dry, perfect for slicing. The dryness that made it unpleasant to eat plain made it ideal for frying. Moist, fresh cornbread would fall apart in the pan. Day-old cornbread held together, absorbed fat without disintegrating, and developed a crispy crust. Slicing the cornbread required a sharp knife and a gentle touch. Cut it into pieces about an inch thick enough to have substantial interior softness, thin enough to fry through without burning the outside. The slices would be roughly rectangular if you'd baked the cornbread in a square pan, or wedge-shaped if you'd used a cast-iron skillet. The edges would be darker and drier than the center. Those edges would become extra crispy when fried. Heat lard in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat. The lard was essential. It had a high smoke point, added flavor, and created the right texture. Butter would burn. Vegetable oil wasn't common in working-class Southern kitchens in the 1970s. Lard was what you had. It was rendered from pork fat, saved in a can by the stove, used for everything from frying to baking. The lard would melt and shimmer in the hot pan, coating the bottom with a thin layer of fat. Place the cornbread slices in the hot lard. They'd sizzle immediately, the moisture on the surface turning to steam. Don't move them. Let them sit undisturbed for 3 to 4 minutes. The bottom would develop a golden brown crust, crispy and slightly caramelized. The cornmeal sugars would caramelize in the hot fat, creating complex flavors: nutty, slightly sweet, deeply savory. Flip the slices carefully with a spatula. The cooked side would be golden and crispy, firm enough to hold together. Fry the second side for another 3 to 4 minutes until equally golden and crispy. Remove the fried cornbread to a plate. It would still be sizzling, the surface crackling as it cooled slightly. The outside would be crispy and crunchy, almost like a corn chip, but thicker and more substantial. The inside would be soft and warm, steaming when you broke it open. The contrast between the crispy exterior and soft interior was the magic of fried cornbread. It had texture, interest, complexity that plain cornbread lacked. Serve it immediately while hot. Some families topped it with butter. A pat placed on the hot cornbread would melt and soak in, adding richness to richness. Others drizzled molasses over it, the dark syrup pooling in the crevices and soaking into the soft interior. The molasses added sweetness and a slight bitterness that complemented the corn flavor. Some ate it plain, just the fried cornbread with its crispy exterior and soft interior, letting the corn and lard flavors speak for themselves. The taste was remarkable. The frying intensified the corn flavor, concentrating it and adding depth. The lard added a savory, meaty note, a hint of pork that made the cornbread taste richer and more substantial. The crispy crust added textural interest and a slight bitterness from the caramelization. The soft interior provided contrast and comfort. Together, they created something that was genuinely delicious, not just acceptable poverty food. Fried cornbread wasn't something you ate because you had to. It was something you ate because it was good. This transformation from leftover to delicacy was central to poverty cooking. You couldn't afford to waste food, but you also couldn't force your family to eat unappetizing leftovers day after day. So you transformed them. You took something that was merely tolerable and made it desirable. Fried cornbread was better than fresh cornbread in many ways. It had more flavor, better texture, more complexity. The leftover became the main event. The economics reinforced this transformation. Making fresh cornbread for breakfast would cost about 20 cents. You'd need to make a whole new pan. Frying leftover cornbread cost about 5 cents, just the cost of the lard used for frying. The leftover cornbread itself was already paid for. Using it for breakfast meant getting 2 meals from one batch of cornbread instead of one. That efficiency mattered when every penny counted. Stretching food across multiple meals was essential to making budgets work. Fried cornbread also showed the importance of fat in poverty cooking. Lard provided calories, flavor, and satiety. A breakfast of fried cornbread with molasses provided carbohydrates from the cornmeal and sugar, fat from the lard, and enough calories to fuel physical labor for hours. The fat was especially important. It slowed digestion, keeping you full longer. It provided concentrated calories, 9 per gram versus 4 for carbohydrates or protein. For people doing hard physical work, farming, construction, factory labor, fat was essential fuel. The cultural context of fried cornbread was distinctly Southern. This wasn't eaten in northern states where wheat bread was standard and cornbread was exotic. This was Southern poverty food, rooted in the agricultural economy of the South, where corn was the dominant grain crop. Fried cornbread connected families to generations of Southerners who'd eaten the same thing. Enslaved people who'd survived on cornmeal rations, sharecroppers who'd grown corn because it was all their land would support, Depression-era families who'd made cornbread because wheat flour was too expensive. That historical weight gave fried cornbread meaning beyond just breakfast. It was heritage food, connecting you to your ancestors' survival strategies. It was regional identity food, marking you as Southern in a way that wheat toast never could. It was class identity food, marking you as working class, as someone who knew how to make do and stretch resources. All of that meaning was embedded in a simple fried slice of day-old cornbread. Children who ate fried cornbread for breakfast often loved it. Unlike some poverty foods that children tolerated but didn't enjoy, fried cornbread was genuinely appealing. It was crispy, which children liked. It was served with sweet molasses, which children loved. It was substantial and filling without being heavy or boring. Many adults who grew up eating fried cornbread remembered it fondly, sought it out as comfort food, made it for their own children, even when they could afford other breakfasts. But there was still shame attached to it. Fried cornbread for breakfast meant you were eating leftovers. It meant you were stretching food across multiple meals. It meant you couldn't afford to make fresh breakfast every day. In a culture that valued abundance and waste, eating leftovers was a marker of poverty. Middle-class families might eat leftover dinner for lunch, but they didn't eat leftover dinner for breakfast. That crossed a line. It revealed economic constraint in a way that was difficult to hide. The technique of frying leftover bread wasn't unique to cornbread. French toast was essentially the same concept, stale bread transformed through frying. But French toast was respectable, middle-class breakfast food. Fried cornbread was poverty food. The difference wasn't in the technique or the concept, it was in the cultural associations. French toast was French, exotic, sophisticated. Fried cornbread was Southern, rural, poor. Same transformation, different status. The disappearance of fried cornbread happened gradually as Southern foodways changed. In the 1970s, cornbread was still standard in many Southern homes. By the 1980s, wheat bread was becoming more common even in the South. By the 1990s, many Southern families had stopped making cornbread regularly. Without regular cornbread, there were no leftovers to fry. The tradition died not because people stopped liking fried cornbread, but because the conditions that created it, regular cornbread baking and the necessity of using leftovers, disappeared when you wanted rice to taste sweet. This was white rice cooked in water with butter and sugar stirred in. In 1970, this cost about 6 cents per serving. That's roughly 50 cents today. Cook rice until soft. Stir in butter and sugar while hot. The butter would melt and coat the rice. The sugar made it sweet. This was breakfast that tasted like dessert. Children liked it because it was sweet. Rice with sugar disappeared when cereal became standard. You can make it for about 55 cents today. But rice with sugar and butter tells a deeper story about how poverty forces creativity with limited ingredients. Rice was one of the cheapest foods available in the 1970s. A 5-pound bag cost about 50 cents and lasted for weeks. It was shelf-stable, required only water to cook, and expanded dramatically when cooked. 1 cup of dry rice became 3 cups cooked. For families counting every penny, rice was economical in ways that even flour wasn't. Flour required fat and leavening to become edible. Rice just needed water and heat. The challenge with rice was making it interesting enough for children to eat willingly. Plain white rice was bland, starchy, and boring. Children complained about it, pushed it around their plates, refused to eat it. But children had to eat. Hunger wasn't optional. So mothers found ways to make rice appealing. Sugar and butter were the simplest solution. Both were usually available even in the poorest households. Sugar cost about 10 cents per pound. Butter was expensive at 70 cents per pound, but you only needed a tablespoon per serving. The total added cost was maybe 2 cents per serving. That small investment transformed rice from something children tolerated into something they actually wanted to eat. The process was straightforward but required timing. Cook white rice in boiling salted water until the grains were soft and had absorbed all the liquid. This took about 15 to 20 minutes. The rice should be tender but not mushy, with each grain distinct but soft enough to bite through easily. While the rice was still hot, this was crucial, add a tablespoon of butter and 2 tablespoons of sugar per cup of cooked rice. Stir immediately. The heat from the rice would melt the butter, coating each grain with fat. The sugar would dissolve partially, creating pockets of sweetness throughout. Some sugar crystals would remain undissolved, providing occasional bursts of intense sweetness. The result was rice that tasted like a dessert masquerading as breakfast. The butter made it rich and gave it a silky mouthfeel. The sugar made it sweet without being cloying. The rice itself provided substance and bulk. This was comfort food, warm, sweet, filling, and familiar. Children would eat bowls of it without complaint. Some even asked for seconds. For mothers struggling to get adequate calories into their children, this was a victory. The rice provided carbohydrates for energy. The butter provided fat and calories. The sugar provided quick energy and made the whole thing palatable. The texture was important to the appeal. The butter coated each grain of rice, preventing them from sticking together in clumps. The rice would be fluffy and separate, not gummy or sticky. Each spoonful would have that characteristic rice texture, soft, but with a slight resistance when you bit down, releasing the buttery sweetness. Some families added a pinch of cinnamon or vanilla extract if they had it. These additions made the rice taste more dessert-like, more special, but plain rice with just butter and sugar was good enough. It didn't need embellishment. This breakfast occupied a strange cultural space. It wasn't traditional American breakfast food. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, oatmeal, those were normal. Rice for breakfast was foreign, associated with Asian cuisines that most rural Americans in the 1970s had never encountered. Serving rice for breakfast marked you as poor, as someone who couldn't afford normal breakfast foods, but it also marked you as resourceful, as someone who could take a cheap ingredient and make it into something children would eat. The shame around rice for breakfast was real but complicated. Unlike some poverty foods that were obviously desperate, like lard sandwiches or vinegar bread, rice with sugar and butter looked almost normal. It resembled rice pudding, which was a legitimate dessert. You could serve this to guests and call it breakfast rice pudding, and nobody would know you were serving it because you couldn't afford oatmeal. That plausible deniability mattered. It allowed families to maintain dignity while eating poverty food. Children who ate rice with sugar and butter for breakfast often had mixed feelings about it as adults. Some remembered it fondly. It was sweet, it was warm, it was one of the few breakfasts they actually enjoyed. Others associated it with poverty and refused to eat sweet rice as adults. The taste would bring back memories of being poor, of eating strange breakfasts that other kids didn't eat, of being different. Food memories from childhood are powerful and persistent. The taste of buttered, sugared rice could transport you back to a specific kitchen, a specific morning, a specific feeling of being young and poor and hungry. The nutritional value was minimal, but not zero. White rice provided carbohydrates and a small amount of protein. If it was enriched rice, which became standard in the 1970s, it also provided B vitamins and iron. The butter added fat, which children's growing bodies needed. The sugar provided quick energy. This wasn't optimal nutrition. There were no vegetables, no complete proteins, no vitamin C, but it was better than eating nothing. It provided enough calories and nutrients to get children through the morning until lunch. The disappearance of rice with sugar and butter happened gradually as breakfast cereal became cheaper and more available. In the 1950s and 1960s, breakfast cereal was relatively expensive, a luxury item for middle-class families. By the 1970s, generic store-brand cereals were competing with name brands, driving prices down. By the 1980s, cereal was cheaper and more convenient than cooking rice. You didn't need to boil water, watch the pot, time it correctly. You just poured cereal into a bowl, added milk, and ate. The convenience was irresistible for busy families, especially families where both parents worked. Cereal also had better marketing. It was advertised on television with cartoon characters and toy prizes. Children begged for it. Rice with sugar and butter had no marketing, no cartoon mascots, no prizes. It was just food that mothers made because it was cheap. When cereal became affordable, families switched without hesitation. Nobody mourned the loss of rice for breakfast. It was poverty food that they were happy to leave behind. But something was lost in that transition. Rice with sugar and butter was made from whole ingredients: rice, butter, sugar. 3 ingredients, all recognizable as food. Breakfast cereal contained dozens of ingredients: preservatives, artificial colors, artificial flavors. Vitamins added back after processing removed the natural nutrients. Rice with sugar was simple. Cereal was industrial. Rice with sugar connected you to the basic process of cooking: boiling water, adding ingredients, creating something edible. Cereal connected you to factories and marketing departments. The cost comparison is revealing. In 1970, rice with sugar and butter cost about 6 cents per serving. In 2024, it costs about 55 cents. That's accounting for inflation and increased ingredient costs. A bowl of name-brand cereal with milk costs about $1.50. Generic cereal costs about 75 cents. So homemade rice with sugar is still cheaper than cereal. But the time investment tips the scales. Rice takes 20 minutes to cook. Cereal takes 30 seconds to pour. For families where both parents work and mornings are rushed, that time difference matters more than the cost difference. The cultural meaning of rice for breakfast has also shifted. In the 1970s, it was poverty food that Americans ate when they couldn't afford normal breakfast. In 2024, rice for breakfast has been reclaimed by food culture as congee or rice porridge, Asian breakfast foods that are trendy and sophisticated. Expensive restaurants serve congee with fancy toppings. Food bloggers post recipes for Asian-inspired breakfast rice bowls. The same food that marked you as poor in the 1970s now marks you as cosmopolitan and culturally aware. The food hasn't changed. The cultural context has. This transformation reveals how food meanings are socially constructed. Rice with sugar wasn't inherently poverty food. It was just rice with sweetener, a combination that appears in many cuisines around the world. But in 1970s America, serving it for breakfast marked you as poor because it wasn't what middle-class Americans ate. Now, serving rice for breakfast marks you as sophisticated because you're eating ethnic food. The same food, opposite meanings, showing that poverty and prestige are about context, not content. Rice with sugar and butter also shows how children's preferences shaped poverty cooking. Mothers could have served plain rice and insisted children eat it, but getting children to eat willingly was easier than fighting them every morning. Adding sugar and butter was a small accommodation that made everyone's life easier. The children ate without complaint. The mothers didn't have to fight. Cost was minimal. This kind of practical compromise, adjusting recipes to make them more palatable, was essential to feeding families on tight budgets. You can make rice with sugar and butter today for about 55 cents. White rice costs about $2 for a pound, enough for 8 servings. Butter costs about $5 per pound. You need maybe 20 cents worth. Sugar costs about $3 for 5 pounds. You need about 5 cents worth. Total cost, 55 cents for a filling. Sweet breakfast the children will actually eat. It's still cheaper than cereal, still simple to make, still tastes good. But almost nobody makes it anymore because cereal is easier and doesn't carry the stigma of poverty food. But making it once, just to taste it, to understand what it was like, connects you to the millions of families who ate this for breakfast in the 1970s. It shows you that poverty food doesn't have to taste bad. It shows you that simple ingredients can be transformed into something appealing. Biscuits with 1 sausage patty, when you could afford meat. This was a homemade biscuit with 1 sausage patty inside. In 1970, this cost about 15 cents per serving. That's roughly $1.20 today. Make biscuits. Cook sausage patties. Split the biscuit. Place the sausage inside. This was the breakfast you ate when money wasn't tight. It had meat, bread, and fat. It was filling and satisfying. This never disappeared. It became the fast food breakfast sandwich. You can make it for about $1.30 today, but this simple sandwich represents something profound, the exact moment when poverty stopped feeling like poverty. When you could afford a biscuit with a whole sausage patty inside, you'd crossed a threshold. You weren't rich, you weren't even middle class, but you weren't desperately poor anymore. You'd moved from survival to stability, from making do to having enough. That transition was marked by meat, specifically by being able to put an entire piece of meat into a single breakfast sandwich without having to stretch it across 6 people. The economics of this sandwich tell the story of upward mobility in working-class families. The economics of this sandwich tell the story of upward mobility in working-class families. In 1970, a pound of bulk breakfast sausage cost about 60 cents. A pound made roughly 8 patties. That's 7.5 cents per patty. Add a homemade biscuit at about 5 cents, and you had a 12-cent breakfast, 15 cents if you added butter. That was 3 times the cost of sawmill gravy over bread. It was 5 times the cost of fried cornmeal mush. But it was also substantial, satisfying, and contained actual meat. For families climbing out of poverty, this sandwich was proof of progress. The biscuit itself was a marker of skill and care. Making biscuits from scratch required knowledge passed down through generations. You needed to know how flour felt when it had the right amount of fat worked into it, like coarse sand with visible pea-sized lumps of lard. You needed to know how the dough should feel, soft and slightly sticky, but not wet, holding together but not tough. You needed to know how to fold it gently to create layers, how to cut it without twisting the cutter, which sealed the edges and prevented rising, how to place the biscuits close together on the pan so they'd rise tall instead of spreading wide. A good biscuit was light, fluffy, and layered. When you split it open, steam would rise from the soft interior. The outside would be golden and slightly crisp. The inside would be tender and pull apart in soft, flaky layers. Making biscuits like this took practice, patience, and attention. It was a skill that marked you as competent, as someone who knew how to feed a family properly. A woman who could make good biscuits had status in her community. A woman who served store-bought biscuits, or, worse, no biscuits at all, was seen as lacking in essential domestic skills. The sausage patty was where the real expense came in. Bulk breakfast sausage was the cheapest form of meat available, but it was still meat. It was ground pork mixed with salt, sage, black pepper, and sometimes red pepper flakes. The seasoning was heavy because the meat wasn't always the highest quality, but when cooked properly, breakfast sausage was flavorful, fatty, and satisfying. It tasted like prosperity. It tasted like having enough. Making the sausage patties required forming the bulk sausage into flat rounds about 3 inches across and half an inch thick. You'd cook them in a cast-iron skillet over medium heat. The sausage would release its fat as it cooked, creating its own cooking medium. The patties would brown and crisp on the bottom. Then you'd flip them to brown the other side. The smell of cooking sausage would fill the kitchen. Savory, slightly spicy, rich with pork fat. That smell announced to the whole family that this was a good morning. This was a morning with meat. The assembly of the sandwich was simple but meaningful. Split a hot biscuit in half. The interior would be steaming, soft, and ready to absorb flavor. Place a hot sausage patty on the bottom half. The heat from the sausage would warm the biscuit even more. Some families added a pat of butter. Others didn't need it. The sausage was fatty enough. Place the top half of the biscuit on the sausage. Press down gently. The biscuit would compress slightly, and some of the sausage fat would soak into the bread. When you bit into this sandwich, you got multiple textures and flavors at once. The biscuit was soft and flaky, with a slight crispness on the outside. The sausage was juicy and well-seasoned, with crispy edges and a tender interior. The fat from the sausage had soaked into the biscuit, making it rich and moist. The sage and pepper in the sausage complemented the buttery flavor of the biscuit. This was a complete breakfast, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, all in one handheld package. This sandwich represented a specific economic position: working class but employed, poor but not desperate. The families who ate this sandwich regularly were the ones who'd found stable work. The father had a union job at a factory or worked construction with steady contracts. The mother might work part-time or take in sewing. The family had moved from crisis to stability. They weren't saving money or building wealth, but they weren't choosing between paying rent and buying food. They were making it, and this sandwich proved it. The social meaning of this sandwich was significant. Children who brought biscuit and sausage sandwiches to school were neither rich nor poor. They were normal. They were working class in the aspirational sense, families who worked hard and had enough to show for it. These weren't the kids with fancy lunches from delis or restaurants, but they also weren't the kids with mayonnaise sandwiches or crackers with lard. They were in the middle, the vast middle of American working-class life in the 1970s. The sandwich also represented gender roles and domestic labor. Making biscuits from scratch required getting up early, often before 5 in the morning. The mother would be in the kitchen while everyone else slept, mixing dough, cutting biscuits, heating the oven, cooking sausage. By the time the family woke up, breakfast would be ready. This invisible labor, the early morning hours spent making food from scratch, was expected and largely unappreciated, but it was essential. It's what made the difference between eating well and eating poorly on a tight budget. The technique of making these sandwiches was passed down through demonstration, not written recipes. Grandmothers taught mothers, mothers taught daughters. You learned by watching, by helping, by eventually doing it yourself under supervision. The knowledge was embodied in your hands, in your sense of timing, in your ability to judge by look and feel rather than measurements. This kind of knowledge is easily lost. When a generation stops making biscuits from scratch, the knowledge dies with them. Their children never learn. The skill disappears. By the 1980s, this sandwich was beginning its transformation. Fast food restaurants started offering breakfast, and the biscuit sandwich became a menu staple. McDonald's introduced the sausage biscuit. Hardee's had their own version. Burger King followed. These fast food versions were convenient and consistent, but they weren't the same. The biscuits were made from frozen dough, baked in batches, and held under heat lamps. The sausage patties were preformed, frozen, and reheated. They tasted okay, good enough, but they lacked the quality of homemade. The rise of fast food breakfast sandwiches changed the meaning of the biscuit and sausage sandwich. It was no longer proof that your mother got up early to make breakfast from scratch. It was something you bought on the way to work, eaten in the car, forgotten by noon. The sandwich became transactional rather than relational. It was fuel, not care. It was convenience, not skill. The emotional and social meaning drained away, leaving only the functional purpose, filling your stomach quickly and cheaply. But something was lost in that transition. The homemade version represented care, skill, and family. The fast food version represented efficiency, convenience, and individualism. The homemade version required someone to sacrifice sleep to feed you. The fast food version required money and a drive-through. The homemade version connected you to generations of women who'd made the same biscuits the same way. The fast food version connected you to a corporation optimizing profit margins. The nutritional difference was also significant. Homemade biscuits were made with lard or butter, flour, buttermilk, and salt. Simple ingredients, nothing artificial. The sausage was ground pork with spices, real food, made from scratch. Fast food biscuits contained dozens of ingredients: preservatives, dough conditioners, artificial flavors. The sausage contained fillers, binders, and chemicals to extend shelf life. The homemade version was calorie-dense, but made from real ingredients. The fast food version was calorie-dense and made from processed ingredients designed for industrial food production. The cost comparison is interesting. In 1970, a homemade biscuit and sausage sandwich cost about 15 cents. In 2024, making the same sandwich at home costs about $1.30. That's accounting for inflation and the increased cost of ingredients. A fast food biscuit and sausage sandwich costs about $3.50. That's almost 3 times the cost of homemade. But most people choose fast food anyway because time is more valuable than money. Spending 30 minutes making biscuits from scratch doesn't make economic sense when you can buy one in 3 minutes. But that calculation ignores the non-economic value. Making biscuits from scratch is a skill worth preserving. It connects you to food traditions and family history. It teaches you that food doesn't have to come from corporations. It shows you that you can make something good with your own hands. These intangible benefits don't show up in cost-benefit analysis, but they matter. The sandwich also shows the trajectory of American working-class life over the past 50 years. In 1970, working-class families had time, but not money. It was made with skill and care. It was affordable but not cheap. It was the American dream in sandwich form. Not wealth, not luxury, but having enough. Being able to feed your family properly, having a little extra beyond bare survival. Today, you can still make this sandwich for about $1.30. The ingredients are widely available. The technique hasn't changed, but most people don't make it because they don't have time, don't know how, or don't see the point when fast food exists. The sandwich survives in fast food form, but the meaning has been stripped away. It's no longer proof of upward mobility or domestic skill. It's just a breakfast sandwich, convenient, forgettable, consumed without thought. But for the families who ate this sandwich in the 1970s, it meant something. It meant they'd made it out of desperate poverty. It meant their mother loved them enough to get up before dawn and make breakfast from scratch. It meant they had enough, not abundance, but enough. That feeling of having enough, of being secure, of moving forward instead of just surviving, that's what this sandwich represented. And that's what's been lost as homemade has been replaced by fast food. The sandwich also represents the end point of this collection of poverty breakfasts. It's the 30th and final breakfast because it's the breakfast you ate when you weren't poor anymore, when you could afford a whole sausage patty for each person, when breakfast included meat, when your mother could make biscuits from scratch because the family had stabilized enough that she wasn't working multiple jobs. This sandwich is where poverty ended and working-class stability began. That transition from poverty to stability is what all the previous 29 breakfasts were working toward. Sawmill gravy over bread, fried cornmeal mush, flour pancakes with water, grits with lard, biscuits with nothing but molasses. These were the breakfasts of survival, of making do, of stretching every penny as far as it would go. The biscuit with sausage patty was the breakfast of arrival. You'd made it. Not to wealth, not to middle class, but to stability, to enough. And that's worth remembering. Not just the poverty breakfasts, but also the moment when they ended, the moment when you could afford meat. The moment when breakfast became satisfying instead of just filling. The moment when your mother could make biscuits with sausage and not worry about whether she could afford it. That moment mattered. It represented hope, progress, and the possibility of better times. The sandwich never disappeared because it represented something Americans wanted to believe in. Upward mobility, the reward for hard work, the possibility of having enough. Even as it transformed into a fast food commodity, even as the meaning drained away, the sandwich persisted, because it reminded people that things could get better, that poverty wasn't permanent, that hard work and stability could lead to having enough. You can make this sandwich today for about $1.30. Homemade biscuits from flour, lard, and buttermilk. A sausage patty from bulk breakfast sausage. Simple, satisfying, meaningful. It won't taste exactly like it did in 1970. Ingredients have changed, techniques have evolved, but it will taste like care, like skill, like someone got up early to make you breakfast. And that's worth preserving, even if most people have forgotten why. 30 breakfasts from Appalachian kitchens in the 1970s. Everyone kept families going through 12-hour workdays. Everyone cost under 15 cents. Everyone disappeared when people had enough money to forget they'd ever eaten this way. These weren't recipes from cookbooks. They were survival. Sawmill gravy over bread, fried cornmeal mush, flour pancakes with water. Your grandmother made these before dawn every morning. She stood at the stove while everyone else slept. She made food from almost nothing and sent her family out the door with full stomachs. We don't make these anymore because we don't have to, and that's a good thing, but remembering them matters. These breakfasts are proof that people survived impossible circumstances with determination and creativity. They're proof that poverty doesn't mean giving up. It means getting up before dawn and making breakfast from flour and lard because your family needs to eat. Let me know in the comments if your family ate any of these. And if you want more forgotten recipes from the 1970s, I'll see you in the next video. So, be happy and wait for upcoming videos on that channel.